What's up, you scholars of enlightenment? Would you like to live to 100 or more in perfect health? And what about 200 or maybe 1,000? It's a fascinating question to contemplate. Researchers around the world are attempting to quantify, understand, and reverse the causes and effects of human aging, a debilitating condition that affects each and every one of us eventually. So today, we're going to be diving into the fascinating subject of human longevity and seeing if there's anything we might be able to do to stay fitter, healthier, and younger for longer. So to help us dive into this fascinating topic, we welcome back Yuri Deigin. Yuri, how are you?
It's Deigin.
Deigin, right? I always thought it was
Right.
Dane. I like to run it along, but Deigin. How are you, sir?
I joke about there's this English word Dane,
Yeah.
Daning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I make a pun sometimes. I'm good, thank
I
you.
thought it made you sound like, very, very regal,
Yes.
aristocracy in the UK. So I was trying
Please
to
address me as
upgrade you a little
sir.
bit. Yeah, there you go. Right, I was putting you up a little bit.
I've been knighted by you just now.
There we go. Me and my low view podcast is on your side.
That's right. By the sword of Low View Podcast, I knight thee into
Exactly.
the Dane of Low View Podcast. All right.
We also have my friend Philipp Markolin. Philip, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Good. Always a pleasure,
Sir
buddy.
Philip. It's
Sir Philip
it's a
as well.
royal congregation.
Philippe. So Yuri is a biotech entrepreneur. I've got into a little trouble on Twitter for calling these two just biologists because to a physicist, they work with squishy systems, so they're biologists. But Yuri is a biotech entrepreneur. He's a life extension activist whose primary area of expertise lies in the field of drug discovery and development. But
Don't read it.
No,
Don't read it.
I'm only doing a little bit this time. Don't worry.
All right.
So today we're going to be diving into things like that, but we're not going to be discussing one particular drug, which I've warned Yuri because I'm scared
Does
of
it start with I?
Mr.
Can I
YouTube
spell it?
algorithm. I'm scared of. So we're not discussing one particular drug. Yes, it does begin with I. And we're not going to be suggesting that you take any drugs, Mr. YouTube watching algorithm. So we're in the clear. Philip is a doctorate in biomedicine from ETH Zurich and now has an excellent science YouTube channel called Protagonist Science, where he discusses cutting edge science and how humans interact with the world around us. So two very good guests to help us discuss this fascinating topic. So Yuri, first question for you. Sounds like a very simplistic, very stupid question maybe, but what are we talking about when we're talking about aging? What we can look at someone and we can see that they have, wrinkles, loss of cognitive function, lower bone density, these kind of things. But when we're talking about longevity and aging, what things are we trying to reverse and what degradation is problematic?
Wow. I mean, there's so much packed in that question. Basically, aging is a rather universal biological process of many living systems, but not all of them. I mean, some systems do not have aging. They don't age. And of course, to a biogerontologist, aging is the process that underlies the exponential increase in mortality risk over time. So basically, that's what we call aging. A system that exhibits an increase in this risk of mortality, we call it ages. And so there's the question of why this happens is still unanswered. We observe a lot of the systems that prevent us from dying, that task with so-called homeostasis, of supporting basically a living system in a living state, all the processes that take care of that. With age, they tend to get downregulated or tend to get worse at that job that they're doing, basically get worse at trying to keep you alive. And so this happens in a very similar process in all species that exhibit aging of kind of in the same species. It happens at the same time. Basically, all 20-year-olds and all 50-year-olds exhibit kind of very similar patterns of having aged. And this process, you can trace it. Like basically, what I think it's a great proof that this is a programmed process, that aging and basically all stages of development, all stages of life history changes are programmed. basically nobody's arguing that, the changes that happen between you being fertilized and then becoming an embryo and then becoming, getting born and becoming a sexually active animal, nobody's arguing that process is programmed. But then people, for some reason, they start arguing that everything that happens afterwards, the downhill process, they think it's not programmed like that because it somehow contradicts evolutionary thinking in their heads, which is, a different topic. But basically what we observe is that this degradation, and again, I tend to go off on tangents. So like if this was supposed to be like a 1 minute answer, stop me right there.
No, feel free to go off on tangents. We have these, of course, we have these 7 or 8, I think, is it hallmarks of aging? So things like genetic instability.
Hallmarks of aging, yeah, like 7 and 9, like canonical.
Telomere attrition, loss of proteostasis, mitochondrial dysfunction. Basically, things start to fall apart as we get older.
Right, but those are hallmarks. Yeah. These are the things we observe, but they're not necessarily the causes of aging. It's still like to me, I think one of the probably the main causes is something that drives aging is the epigenetics of gene expression, basically the mechanisms that control gene expression. I think they are the ones that ultimately determine the aging rate of the organism and the aging process of the organism.
So can you just explain that for people who perhaps aren't as familiar? I'm certainly not an expert in biological fields. What does epigenetics mean? Is that's how the DNA is read and dealt with to create proteins in the cells and this kind of thing?
Pretty much, yeah. It's the control mechanisms of gene expression. So epigenetics is something that kind of on top of genetics. So there's DNA in each cell in our body, and every cell has the same copy of the DNA, but there are very different types of cells in our body. So to account for that difference, there has to be some mechanisms that turn genes on or off or downregulate or upregulate their expression, and all of those collectively are usually called epigenetic mechanisms. So, but there's the epigenetics I'm talking about is the kind of the temporal changes in gene expression, basically between a young organism and an old organism. And we see these patterns that there's a difference in gene expression between, well, obviously between an embryo and between something, once it's born, and between the kind of pre-puberty stage and post-puberty stage, but also like after you're sexually mature, there's also, it continues, the changes in epigenetics or changes in gene expression, they continue throughout life and in a very predictable fashion, so much so that there's actually this concept of epigenetic clock that can very accurately tell how old a person is. So it correlates with biological age, and basically it tells us that it's some kind of underlying epigenetic process, probably underlying aging. And to me, this is like one of the proximal causes. Like what's actually controlling the epigenetic changes is the next question, and we're hoping to get it answered very, very soon. But for now, we see that this epigenetic process that drives aging is something that potentially, if we can actually control it, we can extend lifespan and slow down the aging process. That is behind all those things that you observe later on, like the degradation that you observe, the wrinkles, the accumulation of bad proteins, all of the things. They're basically downstream of the cause of downregulation of the genes that drive, the mechanism that are supposed to prevent those things from happening. They're supposed to prevent, wrinkles, supposed to prevent bad stuff accumulating in cells, and so on. So there's various mechanisms that truly kind of throughout life do all this sort of like garbage collection, basically, or damage prevention. But for some reason, with age, they get worse and worse, and not just worse, but actually like the genes, the expression of the genes that are supposed to be driving those programs, they get downregulated, they get silenced. And that the question is, can we prevent that silencing? And the working hypothesis that we're working on right now is that yes, we can. And if we do manage to do so, then we can expect to see, an improvement of health first and foremost, and that improvement in health, if we can sustain it for longer, will essentially slow down aging or freeze aging altogether.
I was discussing something that you alluded to with Philip when I was making up some questions and thoughts about this topic. So maybe Philip, if you can come in on this idea that we're sort of programmed to do certain things. So we come to sexual maturity, we have a child, and then everything seems to fall apart. Is the problem with trying to fight aging that we're fighting evolution. Essentially, after we've survived and being fit until we've had a child and passed on our genes, our body doesn't care that we fall apart because we're essentially useless for passing on our genetic material. So, fuck it, just die and let's have another one. Let's replace you with another factory model. Is that the problem, that we're fighting evolution? The body doesn't want to go on.
It's even more sinister than that, because the body actually tries to actively kill you. It's not just that it doesn't want. It's got a program of silencing the genes that kept you alive in the first place. And
so that is not completely established, but it's possible, I would say.
In humans, that's the debate. But to me, looking at other species where it's like blatantly obvious, you look at salmon, you look at trees, you look at plants, the semiparous species, where it's like one bout of reproduction and you're done. There's insects
like
that live for only a day.
Things like this.
Yeah, exactly. It's so obvious that this is an adaptive mechanism that genes have found throughout evolution, probably several times, millions or even a billion years ago. So it's not even a question of are the genes capable of killing us for their own benefit? Absolutely, they are they're doing it in other species for sure. And the question is, okay, in mammals, is the gradual phenoptosis or the gradual decrease in fitness that we observe, is it actual phenoptosis where the genes are doing it to kill us? Not even that they don't care. Because obviously they don't care. That this is obvious for sure. If they did care, they would. When the genes want to prolong lifespan over the span of evolution, they obviously do so because we have so many other species that we can look at and say, okay, these ones live longer. Everybody comes from a common ancestor. So obviously, genes, when they have some kind of pressure to prolong lifespan, they can figure it out. But at some point, basically, yes, if they stop, if to them actual change of generations is beneficial, obviously they will not just not care that you as a single individual die, but they will promote this regeneration, new generation after new generation, by having a very kind of fixed lifespan for one individual unit of replication.
Yeah,
Philip, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I want to jump in on that a little bit. So I think it's a bit too easy of a narrative to say that, there's this one program and that is going to kill us eventually. Although what I want to say is that what can happen is that the preferences, right? We have selection pressures at different stages, and the most important selection pressures are, getting child rearing off the hood, getting to sexual maturity, and then also keeping the parents around a little bit so they can raise the next generation. And then, selection pressure might shift away, right? And since genes are pleiotropic, meaning they have multiple different functions, that could mean that, you select for short-sightedness or short-term gain, right? Because if the survival benefit of a genetic program that is very beneficial for the young is very strong, you will select for that, and it doesn't matter that eventually it will kill you in the end after you've reproduced, right? So in that sense, yes, this could happen, and this could happen in multiple ways on multiple fronts, that you have a gene that is very important or that gives you the edge during your early parts of life, during your development. This specific configuration of the gene gives you the edge. However, if you were to maintain, life of like 1,000 years, in the long run, this gene is actually detrimental to you after a short amount of time, right?
So there's a couple of competing views then. One, that selective pressures are weakened sort of after the reproductive age, and so it would be hard for evolution to steer our genomes towards living longer if that doesn't lead to more offspring. And then there's another view that aging is programmed, and that these mutations cause aging.
Yeah, and I don't think they are so necessarily mutually exclusive. I mean, there's different theories of aging, and probably many of them have at least some, nugget of truth to it, right? There's the information loss theory of aging, that just, sometimes you get unlucky by DNA damage, and that alone can trigger then a cascade of, subsequent and suboptimal processes, and in the long run that leads to breakdown. There is, of course, the epigenetic aspect. We have the clock aspect, right? I mean, we know that there are circadian clocks. We know that there are rhythmic circulations of protein and metabolites, and that this over age also gets worse. And, there's a lot of different things that can go wrong in this dynamical system that we are. And I think this is one problem with the longevity research, is that, it's not easy to figure out an intervention when there's multiple systems that fail. It's a bit like cancer, right? There's so many ways how a cell can become cancerous, neoplastic, start proliferating, that we have figured out some ways how to stop it, but not all the ways that there are, right? For aging is a bit similar, right? Because there are many probably different avenues how we age, different proteins that play different roles at different time points. Any longevity intervention that I see is not gonna be, take a single molecule of resveratrol that is in red wine and you're gonna live forever. This doesn't work that way. It's just too many things that can break down and too many things we have to conquer. But that being said, maybe, even with the simple things we can do today, even small molecules, even, some I don't know, some easy genetic engineering that we could do, we can conceivably already expand life at least to, let's say, 100 years, 120 years. Then it gets a bit more murky, because there's probably some mechanism, like Yuri said, that has a hard cutoff at 120 when a lot of things start falling apart. I mean, there was this Nature publication that said, from all the old people we've ever seen and known about, and then they calculated some expectancy, we will never exceed our biological life span over 120 unless we do something radically different to our biology that we are doing today. So all the people that are big believers in NADH or resveratrol or all the other compounds in question, this might increase your health span. And I see it a bit like you're curing a certain vitamin deficiency that we don't know about, right? Let's say some people react super well to metformin or something. Yes, probably because there's something in their metabolism, in their biology, that would speed up aging or speed up the deregulation of the processes that we associate with aging. And by providing that substance, you might cure that deficiency, and therefore they have a more normal progression. And how this normal progression is defined, of course, is very difficult to know. The one theory that Yuri is a proponent of is this strong epigenetic theory that everything is locked and loaded. The other one is like genetic pleiotropy playing a role, and just playing the odds, and maybe it's a summary of all of them. So I wouldn't say there's only one that we can target. There's only one promising avenue, but I start there, and let's go.
So Yuri, is efforts to expand human longevity and the human health span, are they really? Would it be fair to say that they're an effort to undo the avenues that evolution has taken us down at various points in the past?
Absolutely. Fuck evolution. Fuck genes. Yeah, they want us dead. Or even if they want us dead, like passively, they don't care for us.
Exactly.
They just want us to copy them and let them live on in centuries. We don't want to be hostages of their game any longer. We have to figure out a way to do our own bidding and survive for ourselves. And just because the genes have been kind of using us as copying machines for millennia and then discarding us, doesn't mean we have to put up with that bullshit. So yeah absolutely.
I know Philip has the opinion, and I'm sure he'll jump back in now, that we were saying by the time we sort of tinker around with all these systems and work out how to essentially undo the in some way shitty machine that evolution has given us, we might as well start from scratch and just upload ourselves into a robot by the time we've managed to.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do that as well. And I mean, that's I've been kind of proponent of mind imploding for many years, and kind of fanboy of Elon Musk's Neuralink. Of course, Elon Musk is actually kind of latecomer a little bit to this game. But I mean, if he can do it, that's a first step in that direction of gradual mind imploding. And yeah, I think that will actually completely circumvent the problem of biology being just so unreliable. And even if you do stop aging, you get hit by a truck and all of your efforts kind of go to waste. Whereas if you actually upload your consciousness to some distributed place,
Yuri just wants to be the Terminator. Like, you heard it here first, basically.
No. Well, I mean, that's a different concept of actual avatars. Like once you do upload your consciousness, you can have as many, like roaming machines to bring you experience from interacting with reality, as many as you want. But that's a whole different issue. And of course, I mean, right now we're talking about it as just more of a like dream perspective or science fiction perspective. Yeah, because we're very far off from it, but there's nothing fundamentally preventing us. There's no physical law or biological law that will stop us from doing so. So eventually we'll figure it out. It's just might take a few decades for us to do so.
Yeah, that's exactly what I also wanted to say. I don't believe there is any magic to our body. It's just machine that's a bit messy, but in principle everything can be understood and we can tinker with it. It's not there is no mysterious maybe there are mysterious mechanisms because we haven't studied them enough, but there's no mysterious force that lets us age or live in the first place. I mean,
the midi-chlorians.
Aging has been now classified as a medical condition by the WHO, don't you? Obviously an institution very close to your heart, Yuri.
Yeah, funny you should mention that, but actually we've been fighting this fight to get aging into the ICD, the International Classifier of Disease, for many years now. And actually, like my good friend Dari Halkurin was leading this effort, and I was kind of also maybe trying to help out. I think we petitioned the Canadian government many years ago, try to have a hearing. Basically, we thought that the thing is preventing a lot of aging research is that aging is not classified as a disease. So we've been fighting tooth and nail to get WHO to classify it as a disease first. And I mean, it's not there yet completely. It's gotten into like in a little bit of roundabout way in the ICD-11, but I mean, I think
they were resistant for a couple of reasons. It looks like one was that it affects over 50% of people because it affects everyone. So it doesn't go in as a classical rare disease.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't have to be rare, but yeah. I mean, there's different issues, and I mean, it's all about like semantics. Like, if everybody has it, is it even a disease?
Yes.
But
semantics is just wank, right? It's still a problem for people. So
yeah, and for the medical establishment especially, because I mean, but yeah, I don't want to really like get into the bureaucracy of it. Basically, I mean, I think it's making its way, and the most important part is that it's making its way into people's minds. That aging is a problem; it's a medical problem, and we need to do something about it in a medical way. And once that's agreed upon, like we'll just move forward. It doesn't matter about but bureaucracy should play catch up to us, agreeing upon what the course of action is, rather than vice versa.
And you touched on there, or you alluded to while we were having that discussion, certain animals or creatures that we know about that seem to have found a different way through evolution to behave with respect to aging. What sort of animals do we know of which might give us some hints into living longer?
Sure. Well, there's like English, negligible senescence, right? So negligibly senescent animals, basically those who don't exhibit aging, like basically their mortality does not increase with age, kind of stays fixed. And again, like the fact that you don't age doesn't mean you're immortal. Like you still have some risk of mortality. It's just that risk kind of stays constant, and at any given point, that risk can manifest into something that will kill you. Of course, for animals,
naked mole rats and Greenland shark, things like that.
Yeah, naked mole rat is even it's actually a controversial topic.
Yeah, but there's the immortal jellyfish, the Turritopsis thorny, right?
Yeah,
and the thing is, it always goes back to polyp state and forward, right? Which is interesting for this one. But the thing is, in the wild, it has not been observed to live longer than 2 years because it's super sensitive to the water salt concentration. It has so many predators. It has a very special diet. So obviously, that fucking thing, although it can renew back to polyp stage and full to octopus and back, that thing, the Japanese researchers that tried it, they got it to do that like 10 times, and then they died anyways because it's so hard to culture those things, right? So they are not immortal, although technically they don't age or they rejuvenate constantly. They are still dying. So
basically immortal, I guess, in principle, that they don't age from that standpoint. And people just like that word, like journalists love the word immortal, and that's why they throw it around. But basically, is like biology of it is much more tricky than just a very kind of simplistic binary immortal. But I think forget about even the process of aging. There are animals that do age but live much longer than us. So I think we have to first look at them as kind of the example of sharks or whales. Whales, I think, is a great example because they're mammals. They're a very close cousin of ours, and they live to 100 years. And I think we have to maybe look at them as kind of the measuring stick of the first milestone we want to achieve. Why not 200 years? Like, why do humans have to die at 80? Like, the median age for humans is 80 years old.
There's a very interesting point in there, actually, because, and I saw an interview years and years ago with Aubrey de Grey, who obviously works in this field, and somebody said something like, "Yeah, but humans are supposed to live for 70 years," and he's like, "What the fuck? Like, humans used to live to be 20 and die. Like, what a silly thing to say." So a question comes, what counts as longevity research? And maybe this is semantics again, because obviously, washing your hands, having decent sanitation, having
getting your vaccines.
Yeah, right. I'm not going into that because we're going to get nixed again, right?
Drug called.
No,
kidding.
The development of certain drugs that might help, antibiotics, things like this, expansion of human knowledge, not shitting where you eat, literally. These things could all be seen as longevity enhancing either drugs or changes in behavior. So how would you define longevity research, Yuri? Because, does antibiotics count? Does telling people to, do a bit of exercise and not eat complete shit, does that count as longevity research?
That might. I mean, because longevity is a subset of medicine, and all of medicine is tasked with preventing death, right? Preventing death now, acute death, or preventing death a little later, like with chronic conditions. You take your statins or whatever that lowers your cardiovascular risk. That's kind of longevity as well. It's just not kind of packaged as longevity, but really that has given human population, I think, a huge increase in expected lifespan. I think between 10 and 15 years is the estimate, like when statins, basically cardiovascular medications have been started getting prescribed widely in at least maybe like the G7, G8 countries. That resulted, like looking backwards between, I think, the 1970s and 2000, the paper that I read measuring that increased that prescription, that abundant use of cardiovascular prevention increased human lifespan, like the average or the median human lifespan, by 10 to 15 years. But the canonical longevity research is actually kind of looking at the aging process. It basically, whatever you're already doing, whatever we already have, we want to still figure out to stop the aging process, because the aging process does not stop. And all the things you mentioned are kind of additions to what, like, basically the background mortality around the aging process, like antibiotics or vaccines or whatever.
Maybe the distinction between chronological age and how we measure biological age and which markers we have makes more sense, right? In that sense.
Well, I mean, that's a whole different area, like chronological age and biological age. And basically there's some things in your environment and your lifestyle that you can do that can actually like shorten your lifespan. They can basically increase your risk of mortality. And we call this, they kind of increase your biological age. Basically, if you're 40, chronologically, your passport says you're 40 years old, but you've been smoking, you've been drinking, you're obese, your biological age is 55, because that matches your mortality risk. So your kind of odds of dying are in line with the typical 55-year-old than the typical 40-year-old. And conversely, if you're doing like you're a health nut, maybe you're 40 chronologically, but biologically you're 35. But like those things there's some impact of lifestyle. Obviously, if you're doing bad things that but we're actually after the baseline. We're after like, why does there have to be a typical 40-year-old or 50-year-old? We want basically everybody to be a typical 25-year-old.
Yeah.
So like the goal of longevity research is to even take out the aging process of the equation and make sure everybody is, you know, as maximally healthy as possible at any chronological age.
And I was saying this with Philip, this must make the research incredibly difficult to disentangle, because you essentially need a baseline, which is a typical 55-year-old or a typical 25-year-old with how they behave, what they eat, what activities they get involved in. It must be very difficult to disentangle any sort of genetic effects and things like that from those environmental effects. Is that a big problem in longevity research?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, it's just, that's not the problem. The problem is that we just don't know how the fuck aging works, and to actually figure out the genetic mechanism, the epigenetic mechanism behind it, that's a hard part. And basically, it's so universal that all of the minor things around it, like lifestyle and other things, they impact the aging dynamics very little. And so yeah, like as I said, even like the 15-year difference between a typical person and the person doing like the worst possible things is about it. Like it doesn't matter, like as I said, you can stay very healthy, not smoke, not drink, and do all the right things, and your expected increase in life expectancy over somebody doing all the bad things is only like 15 years. So it's not a big impact. And you know, with properly controlled studies, properly matched groups, really you can, if you're after, I don't know, trying to figure out effects, you can control for all the differences, and you can disentangle like genetic things impacting things versus lifestyle things impacting things. So that's not the problem.
Philip, do you want to jump in there?
I want to ask him if he's a big proponent to live your fullest life, because anyway, you know, if you're all healthy all your life, all you do is be old longer.
I mean, I'm a big proponent of enjoying your life, and I think if you're not enjoying it, why even want to live longer?
Not many people know that Yuri is actually 500 years old, and that's why he finds Twitter so frustrating. Yeah, I know, but you know, I've got low views, so I have to keep putting it out. Unfortunately,
you have to repeat it.
Exactly.
Nobody heard the first time. Right?
Now you're here. I got more reach. You know, I do some of that clout chasing, like some of our friends on Twitter, who we won't mention.
I think I know who you're talking about. Big fan of Taleb and who else? I forget. Popper. Forget him.
I'm not going to name
forget about this.
So
yeah, there was something I wanted to, but anyway, yeah.
So a question comes, and this is, you know, a very typical question that you get with environment and genes biology, is how heritable do we know longevity is? So if I am someone who lives to be 100, is it more likely that my children will live to be 80, 90, 100? How heritable is your mechanisms of aging and longevity, and how much of it depends on genes and environment? Do we have any idea of how to separate those out?
I mean, it's a bit of a joke I make that it's 100% heritable between species. So pretty much, you know, like DNA for a species determines its lifespan. That's why mice live 2.5 years and humans live 80 years. Yeah. It's all in the gene, right?
Yeah.
But actually, in trust, like between the same within the same species, between different individuals, there's very little impact of genetics, and the different studies try to like tease out the exact percentages, looking at twins versus like non-twins, siblings, and stuff like that, or non-siblings. And yeah, there's little impact. Like the impact.
This is for humans, right? Because I think there have been some estimates like 10 to 30% for like worms and flies and yeast.
Maybe I can jump in here. So this 10 to 30%. Is always a measure of the variance we observe between people.
Right.
It doesn't mean this if there is a 30% inheritance, doesn't mean that, over your lifetime, 30% longer, if your parents lived the longer, something like that. This is not how it works. It explains the variance between people. And like Yuri said, the variance between people is, 15 years, give or take.
Yeah, very low.
So even if you take the high 30% of 15 years, then you have a 5-year window that you inherit overall. So it's not a very strong genetic component, but of course it's there. And I mean, epigenetics is also inherited. So there's a certain, but the epigenetic inheritance is actually super interesting because it's generational inheritance in the sense that you can inherit the epigenetic imprint of your parents, for example, but it can change over your lifetime. And people have observed that, for example, that when the parents lived through a period of starvation, because there was a war or something similar, then the kids, for example, they would have certain genetic markers that
that's a pretty weak study, but whatever.
You know what I mean, right?
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah, like people who were starving during World War II, they're actually more predisposed to diabetes. Like their children are predisposed to diabetes. Blah blah blah.
Exactly, because they have the markers set for we need more
low.
energy.
But again, like epigenetic inheritance is a different thing from epigenetic control of gene expression. They're all like they have the word epigenetics, and it fools a lot of people. That is it the same epigenetics? No, epigenetics is just more like a molecule. You're talking about molecules. They're different molecules or peptides.
It's like talking about metabolism to a certain extent, right? It's like,
I guess,
a lot of different pathways, a lot of different enzymes doing a lot of different things. Yeah.
Right. So basically, if you're trying to like gauge your expected lifespan by your grandma who lived 200, like it's a completely useless metric because, yes, you might have a little higher chance of living longer, but you're playing this whole different statistics game with so many other risks, environmental risks, and even internally. It's all a numbers game that just because you have a lower risk doesn't mean it won't manifest, doesn't mean you won't get cancer. Just because nobody in your family got cancer doesn't mean you won't get cancer, or vice versa. Just because other people in your family got cancer, you might be predisposed to a high risk, but it doesn't mean you will get it, right? So it's really it's kind of like statistical numbers game and trying to kind of put your mind at ease that, I'm going to live to 100 because my grandma did. I think it's completely the wrong way to look.
Isn't there this anecdote from this French woman who got super old? Although I think it's a bit in question if that's real or not. This Jean Calmet or something.
Jean Calment. Yeah, that was my favorite topic.
And she stopped smoking with 116, only to start again with 117 because it wasn't worth it.
Right. Well, I think the canonical anecdote is, I think she stopped at like 109 smoking because I think she couldn't see the matches or something. That was like the canonical story. But Jean Calment is interesting. Basically, she's like holds the record holder for living longest, 121 years, and there's some question to the authenticity of her age. But basically, even because I think she's 5 years ahead of the next previous record holder. Yeah, like 117, I guess. But anyway, that's a whole. Basically,
but we have a couple of confirmed cases around 115, 117. There's a handful. So
we don't want to. This is not the goal. We don't want to live basically from starting. I guess age 50 is kind of the cutoff where you kind of stop enjoying your health. And maybe 60 for some people, and basically between 60 and however long you get to live, it's not a pleasurable kind of lifespan. So this is not. We don't want to extend that lifespan in people. We want to extend the healthy lifespan as long as possible. So we don't want to see people, suffer for an extra 10 years. We'd rather have them, enjoy life. So
I'm curious how you're gonna do it. What you're doing with your company. Well, what is your approach?
Our approach is, study? As I mentioned, the epigenetics driving aging, and we're trying to drive epigenetics backwards. Our approach is using Yamanaka factors, which have been proven to rejuvenate cells, completely back to their embryonic state.
So we have this really nice study, don't we? Yuri, sorry to cut you off, just so people can see it. There's this study that was done, I believe it was in mice, where they crushed the optic nerve of the mice
The
essentially
Sinclair study,
yeah, essentially making the mouse blind in one eye. And then when they deploy these Yamanaka factors, they can essentially get the cells to go back to being stem cells and then rejuvenate the optic nerve of the eye, and the mouse can see again. Is that sort of the same sort of thing you're trying to do, or the same?
It's not exactly what you said, because they don't get
Please correct it what I said, because that was a physicist
Yeah.
explaining biology. So please feel free to correct what I said that was wrong.
Sure. Basically, yeah, the Yamanaka factors are these magic factors that really kind of revolutionized biology and turned the understanding of people's understanding of how, at least how differentiation works on its head. Because before Yamanaka, most people believe that cells differentiate in a kind of one-way fashion, irreversible fashion. That once you start from a stem cell, and once you get to the terminal differentiation of, I don't know, a neuron or a skin cell or whatever, like that, that's fixed. Like that cell can no longer go back up the path to stem.
They thought it's a cascade. One gene pattern triggers the next gene pattern, triggers the next gene pattern, and this rolls down until you're final.
Landscape. Yeah. That's right.
This is not true.
No, Yamanaka discovered, well, I mean, there were some initial science from John Gurdon. That's why John Gurdon got a Nobel Prize as well with Yamanaka. But John Gurdon did it in 1968, and everybody was like, that must be some experimental error, and dismissed it. But basically, Yamanaka showed that it's completely false. Any cell can go back to pluripotent state if you kind of activate the right genes. And of course, the right genes are are the ones that maintain pluripotency in embryonic cells. So it was just kind of this magic of how things work in biology, that if you activate those things that are responsible for maintaining stemness, if you activate them in terminal cells, magically those genes know how to kind of bring the cell back into embryonic state, like change its morphology, change its biology, like the actual things that are going on within cellular process, change it back to the embryonic state, which is like, it's magic. So that was one thing. And that opened a whole new field of regenerative biology, of saying, okay, we're going to take old people's cells, culture them back into pluripotent state, nearly embryonic state, essentially. And then from that embryonic state, we'll then produce back whatever kind of tissues or organs that old person needs, and we'll replace them, in that person. Of course, sounds great on paper, but it's really hard from an actual therapy standpoint. It's really hard. We were not even there yet with organ printing, and that's a whole different issue. But the issue that we're working with right now, not issue, but the discovery, the part of the discovery of Yamanaka that we're working with right now, is that in the process of getting those cells back into embryonic state, those cells are also physically rejuvenated. Whatever hallmarks of cellular aging that accumulated in those old cells, after reprogramming, they're gone. And that was one of the other...
Well, except for DNA damage, I guess. But,
No, DNA, I mean, if you mean like mutations that got fixed in the DNA, but like even double strand breaks and all the other hallmarks of... Oh, wow, my battery's running low. They're gone. And then once people realize that this is what goes on the cellular level, they wondered, can we do this on organismal level? Can we do this in vivo? And of course, initially the experiments were not that successful, because if you actually reprogram cells, they get into pluripotent state, and from then on they can cause tumors. They can cause cancers called teratomas. And that was very dangerous, and killed the initial mice in the initial experiments. But then there was a paper out of Salk by Alejandro Campo in 2016 who showed that actually you can figure out like a safe therapeutic window where you get the benefit of rejuvenation, but still don't get the dangers of cancer. So basically you can find a narrow therapeutic window where you can, thankfully the process of rejuvenation is gradual. It's not like a binary thing. So we can find kind of narrow window in there where you already got rejuvenation, but you still don't have cells losing their identity. And that inspired me to start Ethereum back in 2017 and try to start translating this paradigm of partial reprogramming using Yamanaka factors and this is the pathway that we've been on ever since.
So we have to be careful not to go back too far, because we just make a giant cancer cell of stem cells, but we need to go back far enough to rejuvenate the cell, but have it keep its identity in the eye or in the throat or in the heart,
it's a bit like switching on a house cleaning program in that sense, right? You have a cell that's already a bit weakened, you have oxidative damage, you have some other pathways that are not running as smoothly anymore, maybe of protein aggregates and stuff like that. The cellular wall has old lipids, it's a bit stiff, and then you introduce this transcription program that kind of does a bit of house cleaning that restarts a lot of these processes. At least so is the idea. I mean, obviously biology is a bit more complex than that. Also, I want to say, as a cancer researcher, we also observe that sometimes in tumors we get kind of this expression of these Yamanaka factors, so like SOX2, OCT4, others like that, and then these are implicated actually with more tumor aggressiveness, meaning that the tumor kind of, if it reaches a barrier, it mutates back, and then it can differentiate a bit easier. Or, for example, in EMT transition, which means that the tumor kind of, can separate from the solid tumor that it's part of, go into your bloodstream, and start somewhere else on a new site, right? And this is all via these reprogramming factors as well, or at least they play a role in that. I mean, obviously biology is not that far that we can say this is all the mechanisms there are to it, but some of them have shown that at least some cancers do that and have a distinct advantage when they can reuse this reprogramming. We also know from heart disease, for example, when you have a hypertrophy in the heart, that the heart cells they grow bigger, and sometimes also some cells start a kind of activation program of that is usually associated with the how's it called, with the young heart, not with like mature hearts, but usually with younger hearts, like for example hypoxia signaling gets reactivated, stuff like that. So yeah, cells are dynamic systems, and I mean the trick is, how can you keep the car running, right? this is a bit the tricky question, and I'm very skeptical saying that there's one thing we can do, although personally I also believe that this stem cells in general and stem cell therapy has at the moment probably the highest chances, just because biologically you don't really do anything weird, right, to the cells. You just do what the cells have been doing all the time, right? You restart them from a stem cell and move forward, right? And I don't see, except for if you accumulate too many somatic mutations in your genome, I don't see how this process could not run at least a few times before everything falls apart.
Mutations are a red herring, though. I mean, any mutations you accumulate are different mutations within different cells, and they're spread so sparsely between cells and between organs that really the mutational theory of aging, or hypothesis of aging, has really been disproved.
No, I don't think because of DNA this is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, I don't think that we will maintain complete functionality, being able to rejuvenate constantly, because the information of the DNA will degrade eventually, right? Just because
just
of
physics,
accumulated
just entropy,
in a billion years.
Yeah, I mean, that is a question, right?
Heat death of the universe, we might run out of DNA fidelity. But no, I'm joking, of course. But I mean, our goal really is to, I think, live for at least or at most another 100 years before mind uploading will be solved, exactly. And all the problems of biology will be solved by different methods. And, really,
I'm still curious a little bit how you suggest, if you, let's say you have a treatment or something, would you, let's say you have, I think you work with like the idea of prolonging the life of pets, right? Would you then create a pet that is like, every cell in that pet, you start from, from an embryo, you do CRISPR or whatever in that embryo, and then introduce, for example, an inducible promoter in front of the genes, in front of the Yamanaka factors, and then once the pet is like, I don't know, 5 years old, you give it a dose of whatever doxycycline to start the program,
just hard reset it like a computer, like turning off.
Yeah, not a hard reset, but give it a little dose, see if it helps, stop it again. So what is your idea? I'm very curious.
Sure, and
like a live Tamagotchi, basically. It just like starts again.
I mean, no. What you're talking about more is a delivery issue. Like once we figure out what genes that we and what mechanisms we're going to use for that partial reprogramming that are safe and effective, how do we then deliver those genes into organisms? And of course, with unborn organisms, it's very easy. You just you do genetic engineering. You incorporate them at the stage of the embryo in the first few cells. Not using CRISPR, using lentivirus. CRISPR, like for some reason, people think that CRISPR is always a magical tool that actually does, gene integration. CRISPR usually is only like good at cutting things or inactivating things. So you actually use lentivirus, AAV, adeno-associated virus, or adenovirus, with like vaccines use. To deliver the genes that you want, deliver genes of interest. And of course, in the case of embryos, you actually want to integrate into the gene.
Yeah, but I don't think
lentivirus.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more skeptical about the virus delivery than I am with CRISPR, just because,
I mean, you still need
you cannot
to deliver
choose
CRISPR
where to integrate
with a virus. I mean, that's how you deliver CRISPR. But anyway, don't worry about it. So
that's not true for oocyte injection. I did them without viral. You can directly inject them in the oocytes.
You mean the actual protein? You inject?
Yeah,
CRISPR.
I mean you pre-assemble really you pre-assemble the protein with the guide RNA together, and then you inject the complex directly into the blastocyte. So
right,
we did that. That works.
You can just cut things in whatever you're.
Yeah, you go in.
But we actually need to deliver the genes, right?
You can also add a template that then gets integrated where you cut. So
it's a very short template. Like we need to deliver thousands.
Yeah, I mean, this is the question. What do you need to deliver? If you just need to deliver,
right.
This depends on your strategy in the end.
If you need to deliver a gene that is 1,000.
Yeah, but I don't think people would deliver a gene. You would probably just add a promoter element or something that you can target in front of your already integrated Yamanaka factor genes. Anyway,
endogenous? No, it's actually that's more dangerous because
you think it will disrupt.
Of course, I mean you're changing the promoter like an endogenous.
Depends on
gene.
Which region, sure.
And no, like basically what we want is a very safe system with a lot of fail-safe mechanisms that once we figure out what genes we want in our payload. The way we deliver it is going to be in a normally silenced cassette that is only inducible by, as you said, tetracycline or some other molecule. And even so, we want another kind of fail-safe mechanisms that basically, even if you overdose on the inducer, there's some sort of kill switch that won't let the cell overdose on the transcription factors. But we got an off tangent. Basically, to answer your question is, once we figure out what to deliver, we can deliver it to already formed organisms like humans or pets via gene therapy, via injections, or to unborn pets or humans in embryo stage. We just put those genes in, put the cassette in, and of course it's silent until integrated. So if by the time the pet is 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, and we figure out that something is actually not working, we don't have to induce that cassette, and essentially like no safety issues whatsoever.
So as I'm understanding what's being said, we're delivering genes in with this therapeutic approach, and essentially a set of instructions are being put there that at some point we can activate these genes with a certain compound, a certain molecule to do these resets. That's the general idea?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not even a reset though. It's a rollback. Actually. We call it epigenetic rollback. So basically you kind of roll back the gene pattern to a little more younger state.
So the important question obviously becomes, how are we going to determine what those or what that genetic payload should be? How will you, without giving too much without giving too much away of your research, how are we doing those studies? Because obviously doing human studies seems like it's probably not on the table at the moment. I don't know what the sort of ethical framework is on that. And then obviously you can use animal models, but maybe they're not close enough to humans. How are you proceeding with trying to work out the
close
genes
enough to humans?
Okay.
Yeah, basically, well, we know, thankfully, from the magic of science, where we know the Yamanaka factors do the work, but they kind of fraught with risks. So we have to then take a two-pronged approach. Like we have the bird in hand with the Yamanaka factors, and we try to then optimize this approach into a therapy, translate it into a therapy, and this is our kind of like the baseline, right? And then in parallel, we also try to improve upon it, try to find different factors, safer factors, or try to find ways of using Yamanaka factors a little differently, that will still open up the window, the therapeutic window, basically open up the safety margins. And so how you do this? You kill a lot of animals, kill a lot of mice in experimenting with mice, trying to navigate what makes them live longer, what actually kills them, and not just, besides just those two obvious readouts, you have the epigenetic clock that you can actually measure, or various physiological manifestations of aging that you can measure between the two groups and see, is your therapy actually doing what you hope it is, which is slowing down aging or even rejuvenating older mice. And this is essentially what we're doing right now, running tests on mice with various combinations of our therapies to figure out, are we on the right track or not? And once we confirm that, this works in mice, then we just scale it up to, other animals or ultimately humans.
So essentially we do control studies delivering certain therapies. One set of mice gets them, one set doesn't. And we see if, when we look at those markers of aging, if one is essentially being able to stay younger for longer, given those markers.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
So the standard way we sort of
drug
do
development.
medicine, standards.
It's pretty boring. It's really the same for anything, for any therapy, whether it's the drug that starts with I or the magic gene therapy that hopefully will keep us living indefinitely young.
Thank you very much for not mentioning that drug. I appreciate it.
I'm still very confused with the delivery, because for this rejuvenation approach, you would actually have to target all the cells in the body, and there's no way of delivery we have for that, right?
Well, not necessarily all, but a big proportion of the cells, and of course, it might not need to be in all of the organs. So we have to look at the kind of the critical organs that fail us first and foremost. And they're known. And I don't want to give out any kind of trade secrets just yet. But basically, so
there are viruses that specifically target, for example, the heart, the liver, right? And if I see gene therapy for that, and rejuvenating the heart, for example, that's already a big application, for example, that you could do. And so this I understand, but when it comes to, it's still the same problem. You have to fix so many parts in the body, right? Because all the different parts would need rejuvenation eventually, right?
There is, maybe it's a kind of a hope of mine that let me start from the beginning. There is definitely some sort of centralized control mechanisms in our bodies that kind of does systemically synchronize aging and development within all our tissues. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to, form as an embryo correctly or start puberty correctly. Like, there is synchronization between the tissues. Clearly, it's in the brain. Most likely, it's in the hypothalamus and the hypothalamus pituitary axis. And this has been looked into by scientists back in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s.
They're talking about the clock genes and
not necessarily even the clock genes.
The master clock, or what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's definitely a synchronization with the circadian rhythms and that. But even beyond that, hypothalamus controls, so many biological processes and processes of just
homeostasis and things like this.
Not just morphological process during the embryogenesis, but then like it sets off puberty, it controls menstrual cycles, it sets off menopause, and so many other things. But so basically, to keep the kind of the tangent short, hopefully, maybe we can, if we target the right regions in the brain, we might even hope to have a systemic rejuvenating effect. If we can rejuvenate maybe that hypothalamus pituitary axis, it might then trickle down to other organs. But it's a very kind of unproven hypothesis. Yes, yet it's just my kind of pet hypothesis that I've been hoping to test for many years. And if that succeeds, then we might even need to target everything in the body. We might just need to target, one precise location in the brain. But even if that doesn't pan out, as I said, we don't have to target all of the organs. We just have to target the critical ones. What fail? Yeah, the heart, the kidneys,
the brain, right? And the brain.
Well, the brain is the most resilient organ. Like the aging, it ages the slowest of all the tissues. I mean, I'm not talking about dementia, but it just in like the actual.
I mean, all the proteopathies we see in the brain. I mean, right? Once you have the statins, people didn't die from the heart anymore. Now people start dying for cancer around the 80s. If they succeed, what's next on the line? It's the proteopathies of the brain, right?
Let's get there. Yeah.
Let's get there first, sure.
Yeah. But of course, the brain is definitely a target of ours. But I wouldn't. Again, like there's many other things that kill us before the brain.
One step at a time.
Yeah, it's just for me, it's like, it sounds so attractive to have, you perturb one specific system or one specific, set of protein or one program, and then, suddenly things will fall in place. But this is usually not how biology works in any respect, because there's so many interchanging factors, right? Overall, you have the metabolism that plays a role. You have the immune system, right? And all those cascading, interconnected dynamic systems, they all feedback off each other. And even if you manage to turn one part into a thing that gives you what you want, doesn't mean that the other parts will start playing ball. So this is something that
science never does what we want, does it? Right. So we'll have to. I guess we'll have to see how far we can get, and then tinker when we hit another problem.
I'm not saying, so this is not to say that I'm skeptical about the project of increasing lifespan and doing the research. Also, what you suggest, I think this is valuable research. I think it should be done. I think it has promise. I'm just thinking it usually, the more we learn, the more we learn how wrong we were in our assumptions in the first place. And I think this will happen to aging, as it happened to nutrition, as it happened to cancer, as it happened to a lot of other complex processes in our body that every time people study there's more and more complexity to be unearthed and more feedback mechanisms to be found. And for aging, I assume it will be similar.
This is definitely the problem, isn't it? That you can't, as you say, you can't just play with one thing in your car. If I put in a new engine, that affects how much gas it takes, and then it uses more energy, and then I need a different battery, and I need more oil or whatever I need. If I tinker with the machine, it affects other systems. So as soon as you start messing around, there's a lot of unintended impacts that you can have.
Yeah, that's one thing. The other thing I want to say, and this is also something that maybe doesn't get explained a lot, we did not reach a maximum in our biology. Evolution does not select, for maximum capability or maximum ability. So over and over, we observe that sometimes we can do interventions, sometimes we can find compounds that actually, expand our capabilities, right? So it's not that we are at the peak. We are not at the peak. It's not clear. Evolution just made us, fulfill our purpose, which is transport our genes through the generations, and made us capable enough to do that. But that doesn't mean that we have, for example, reached peak intelligence, right? Because we now know, for example, there are cognitive enhancers that work, for example, to increase how much people can memorize. So this is something that there is some biological mechanism that prevents that. We switch the mechanism off, and then suddenly people can memorize more. So there is a lot of things we don't know yet, and so it's always hard to say that we can never achieve beating death or succeed eternal life. It might be possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying if it is, it's probably more complicated than just targeting one or two mechanisms.
The point you made, obviously I'm not an expert in biology, but the point you made was the one that made me feel slightly skeptical about this as well. This idea that evolution hasn't produced an amazing machine. It is amazing in many ways, but not an optimized machine. So just taking out one bit and putting in another bit is going to be very, very difficult, because really it's just a higgledy-piggledy mishmash of bits that were good for certain selective pressure and another bit that was good for something else, and then yeah, they kind of work and they were good enough to help us survive, but they're not, they're not a BMW. They're some hacked together thing.
It's not designed, right? Evolution works very differently than our design, right? And so that's why often our intuitions are very wrong about things. And also the way how, for example, I talked a lot about this pleiotropy of proteins, right? But it's not that, every gene can have multiple functions, but there are some genes that have way more function than other genes. So it's also, we have a certain network structure. It's super interesting when you do some computer science and some networking, and you see that certain rules, for example, how internet hubs are connected, are very similar to how cellular hubs are connected. So there are some Pareto distribution laws that apply for these complex organically evolved systems that seem to hold, right? And so you have, for example, for genes, you have a master hub like P53, and that protein, plays a role in so many different aspects. And, and if you find a good way to, maintain that program, you save a lot of things at once. And I think epigenetics or specific epigenetic markers could be one of those hubs. And I think it's realistic to assume the Yamanaka factors like OCT4 and SOX2 are these centralized hubs, because we see them. They are very old proteins. They share similarity. All animals have them. All have them doing similar things like this developmental functions. So it's very likely that targeting these have a higher chance of having bigger effects than finding some unrelated protein that evolved late and doesn't really do too much overall yet, right? So this.
I think Yuri's run off to get his phone charger. Are you still there, Yuri?
Yeah, can you? I'm actually logging in from a different Zoom. Can you actually switch me from?
Yeah, I should be able to.
That one, because my phone just.
Okay, give me 1 second, and I'll kick. It's all right. I'll kick you out of here, and then. I'll try and let him back in. Is he back?
Did you have internet in Canada?
It's shifted all the things about. 1 second, guys. We will be back. I will just put the I'll put the transition screen on for 1 second, and we'll be back.
Yeah. So, how does it look? Where is he? It looked like he went outside on a park bench. Yeah. Talk about, yeah. I wouldn't also recommend it, to be honest. The evidence is not there. Mhm. There's a password. I didn't have a password. Ah. That's silly. Can you not invite him? That's not possible, I guess, now. You can only send the link, I guess. Yeah, Zoom is sometimes a bit difficult. You put "wanna be forever young" on the back.
All right.
We're back, guys.
Back
We are back.
Yeah, kicking off is a bad idea because it doesn't let people back in
Yes.
on the same account.
Yeah, sorry, that's my fault. I didn't realise
No worries.
what happened there. Good. So, Yuri, I thought as we sort of finish this up, obviously the work that you're
Now that I'm back in, you finished.
no.
it's
I mean,
still
like,
gonna be
I mean the final furlong, right? The work that you're doing with Ethereum is obviously very higher level, trying to deal with aging of many parts of the body, if not all of the body. There's also some interventions, some drugs, some compounds that people try to push, so we say, that are on the market. We're not suggesting that you try any of them, but there are certain compounds that people say can help increase your longevity. Any thoughts about those compounds that are on the market?
Nothing.
No?
Like what? No, there's nothing.
Thinking
really.
about rapamycin.
Well, it's not on the market. Yeah, rapamycin, metformin, they're not on the market for longevity at all. Some people take them as, like biohackers take them because they saw some studies in mice that, rapamycin prolongs murine lifespan by like 15%. It's funny that Mikhail Благосклонный is a big proponent of rapamycin. Mikhail Благосклонный is the son of Professor Dillman, who is a big hypothalamus guy, but this is just a tangent. So many things very interesting about the longevity
That's all right.
movement.
Keep going.
But I wouldn't take rapamycin at all. I mean, it's an immune suppressor to start. Basically, the effect that they see in animals, the effect in mice, it's so small to then hope that it will translate in anything in humans and actually take drugs like rapamycin or like metformin. Metformin is actually a bit safer because it's a anti-diabetic drug, and people on it, diabetics on it, were shown to live a little longer than people not on it, like supposedly healthy controls, and that actually what started the whole metformin hysteria.
Is this more that it's treating some other condition though, rather than it's actually doing
metformin is probably just kind of decreasing glucose metabolism and helping you maintain a little healthier weight. But really, like when the latest study actually examining healthy people, I think like the difference was only like 5% in terms of longevity, basically a lifespan increase or mortality risk decrease. So it's really minor effect. I mean, it's being studied right now in old people by Nir Barzilai under his TAME trial. I think he's got a few thousand people on it, like old people, to see if it actually has a systemic effect on their aging, like lowering their essentially all age-related conditions. But again, I don't expect any like major effect from it. I don't see any reason to expect a major effect from it. So I mean, we're talking about semantics here. I guess, I mean, some drugs do show some longevity extending effect, but it's just so minor that I wouldn't bother with them, and I wouldn't really call them life extension interventions. They're just very, very minor. I mean, this is not what I'm after. This is not something I would get excited about, like any existing. And there's been like dozens and dozens of things that, have been touted, like resveratrol or nicotinamide now, like NMN versus NR. And like you're talking about like splitting hairs, guys. Like, okay, we have a, 10% life extension in worms with nicotinamide or in mice, and trying to hope that, taking it in humans will have the same effect without even having studies to support this. To me, it's actually akin to religion, akin to this drug whose name
I was going to say, it sounds very much like another area of medicine
and I think
we've been discussing.
Mentioned it a few times why I think I have kind of a trained eye for bullshit studies, because I've been in longevity for so long, and there's just so many bullshit studies in longevity that you actually have to kind of know. Like you look at the study and you're like, okay, this is either reaching very far from like trying to make a leap from a small study in mice with like a huge variance in the data to why don't we try this in humans, and which is usually a problem, to like actually maybe possibly fraudulent data.
Exactly.
Like, this is not making sense. Like, you sure those mice live that long? I mean, this is like anyways, so yeah, basically that's why. And it's been very kind of transferable, that skill set of mine, to this now COVID stuff, with like all new things popping up, because I mean, there's always something promising popping up in animal data. That's just by virtue of experiments, sometimes seeming like out of like 1,000 experiments, you have maybe 100 experiments that actually show promise just by virtue of statistical anomalies. And then you actually like drill down, because it's small sample sizes. It's like tossing a coin. Sometimes you'll get a row of 10 heads even if you toss it long enough. But they actually have to then like drill down into each study, and like or just reproduce it, like without even thinking, does the mechanisms of action make sense? Like with the drug whose name won't be mentioned, you just have to go into a bigger sample size, or even like actually go into humans. Thankfully, with a lot of repurposing efforts, they already start with drugs that are approved for human use, and they're very quickly can be checked. Do they actually work against COVID or not?
Yeah. So there's not really much data out there for these.
Also, let me say drugs overall, right? We have no single molecule drugs that, affect our cells in a way that's like, 100% efficacy for whatever it needs to do. That's just not how it works. The only drugs that work a little bit like that are antibiotics, but what they do is they kill the cells. And we have a lot of drugs that kill cells. The good part about antibiotics is they only kill bacterial cells and not human cells. That's why we can, swallow them and get rid of the bacteria. But other than that, drugs that affect a small a protein expression, a kinase, whatever you want, and expect a huge phenotypic change, it's just not realistic for anything. I mean, all the years of drug development, even the best drugs we have barely an efficacy that is close to 50%. Most of them are 20%, and they're already pretty good blockbuster drugs. And if you have something like a miracle drug like Gleevec that melts certain types of cancer cells, yes, maybe you get an efficacy 50% of the patients that have this tumor. Gleevec actually helps them get rid of the cancer, but not all the patients. And it's so unrealistic to expect that just take resveratrol and you're gonna live longer.
That's the red wine one, right? The one that's
the red wine one, yeah. Wine. I mean, also the studies like you said, I mean, either they are terrible biased, also flawed. I mean, I told you there was this one study on red wine consumption where they found that basically people that drink red wine live longer than people who drink beer and longer than people who don't drink alcohol at all. This was surprising because you would think that people that don't drink alcohol...
Brought to you by winemakers of France.
But yeah...
and then what actually realized, because they couldn't find people that didn't drink alcohol at all, they took ex-alcoholics, right, in their control group, saying that wine drinkers live longer than beer drinkers. They didn't control for economic factors because usually richer people drink wine and richer people live longer. They didn't do that anyways. And then they saw that the non-drinker group, because they couldn't find enough people that don't drink at all, they had to go to the anonymous alcoholics, basically people that had already, drank away their liver or whatever. And of course, their life expectancy wasn't that great after that.
Dragging some tramps off the street to be the control group, just ridiculous.
And many of the studies
already dead people,
no, we're not. No.
It's not. I'm like.
So this is the problem when you say, there is some human data, when people say we have a prospective study, we compared the group that, took over the lifetimes, a lot of wine, the other group didn't, right? And we see they live longer. Yes, but there are so many confounding variables that detangling this, we cannot even do that for nutrition, right? Yeah. I mean, that's why our nutritional advice is very basic and not very detailed. We cannot do that for nutrition. Why would we think we can do that for aging? And when they have a million factors, even how people can die, can get sick, that are not even aging related, that would factor in these studies. So you cannot detangle that.
So there's a lot of things on the market, but they're more for sort of biohackers, people who think they've got some insight, but there's no real data there. The advice is, try and be healthy, do some exercise, don't eat complete shit.
I would not recommend, excessive use of any supplements or of anything that is being proclaimed by people to have super life extending effects, because that's not a factual claim. That's just marketing or even.
And there's the difference between supplements and actual drugs. Supplements are generally safe. You can take whatever, vitamin D or there's many supplements, but metformin and definitely rapamycin, I'd be very careful. Even if or when I was a biohacker, I wasn't taking those ones, just by virtue of the risk reward profile.
Exactly.
For my mind,
so I think a good handling is, every drug has a side effect, right? And if a drug doesn't have a side effect, it also doesn't have an effect, basically, right? And the same is for, all these things that are claimed to be super safe, some supplements, vitamin C, yes, but then most of the time, they have no effect unless you have a vitamin C deficiency. They have no effect on top of that, right? And for these drugs, a lot of that is similar, right? It's nice to supplement because many people profit from the supplements if they are lacking through a very, one-sided lifestyle, or they have some genetic predisposition. I would never claim that some of these supplements cannot help people, but as a general intervention, it's not sufficient, nor does it do anything for most people. And I would certainly not pay, $50 for a jug of pills.
You can get a really nice bottle of red wine for that. That'd be
just because somebody on YouTube told me, it's going to extend my life for sure. because my metabolism is going to be so much better after that.
Well, so here you mentioned YouTube and people potentially giving out medical advice when they shouldn't. The other thing that people go on and on and on about for this life extension is calorie restriction and intermittent fasting. Our friend and medical expert Joe Rogan obviously is doing this because obviously he is. Yuri, is there anything in this? Because people swear by this. I know some very smart scientists that I know who are banging on to me all the time about not having lunch and fasting for 16 hours a day every other day or whatever they might choose to do. What's going on with this? Any evidence here at all?
Full disclosure, I'm a former recovering intermittent faster.
Right.
We should have an intermittent fasting anonymous group, maybe. But no, I was big on like caloric stuff because funnily enough, out of all interventions that do prolong lifespan, caloric restriction is the most effective one in mice. And this is very sad state of affairs. That for all the drugs that humanity has, invented or discovered, nothing prolongs lifespan in mice better than just good old starvation. And essentially this tells us that there's actually just how strong the underlying genetic mechanism is. Basically, only when genes want you to live longer, they'll let you live longer. And for mice, I think it's pretty obvious why this happens, because during times of starvation, they need to, genes figure out they got to let them live longer to overcome or survive this period of starvation and then breed the next generation, because they're very active breeders. So and this is actually a game of a two-pronged game, because you actually have to decrease reproduction in times of starvation so that you don't exacerbate the problem, and then you also have to prolong lifespan, let animals live longer so that they can survive, and once they do survive, then they can breed. Basically this has inspired a lot of people to think that by using some kind of caloric or diet interventions, they can do the same thing in humans. And this has been big, like Luigi Fontana with his fasting mimicking diet. And he's actually a student of this guy, Jesus, I'm blanking on the name. Was it Walker? From the 80s, the biosphere experiment. He was in California, and he actually, he had a book that if you eat less and live to 120 or something, but then he died at 79, age 79. Jesus, why do I not remember his name? But so he was the guy saying that by caloric restriction or intermittent fasting or whatever, you can greatly prolong lifespans. And he went into this biosphere experiment that Biosphere 2 it was called in the 80s, I guess. And they actually they purposefully took less food with them that was necessary in hopes that this will make them healthier. And he came out of that experiment a year and a half later with having lost a lot of weight. And there's two very striking photos of before and after of this guy. And then I mean, even before that, there's this book. I'm having early onset Alzheimer's. I can't remember all those names.
You need to work out that payload as quickly as possible, Yuri.
That's right. I should on myself. Right. Basically this fasting cure is the book, and I forget the guy who was on it.
Maybe I can do a quick Google for you.
It was in the early. Basically, it was early turn of the century. He was promoting fasting as a cure for all kinds of diseases, and it's kind of started the cascade.
Upton Sinclair found.
Sinclair, that's right. Upton Sinclair. And this has been kind of going in and out of fashion for many years. And in the current incarnation, it returned as this intermittent fasting, where you still kind of fast yourself, and there was a study in mice actually which showed that again, you don't have to starve them continuously, but if you actually just do some kind of interval of 12 hours to 18 hours of them starving without food, then actually you can let them eat however much they want and still enjoy the benefits of this, caloric restriction. But of course, lifespan studies as well have seen this, like back in 1930s, like McKay, I think it was Robert McKay, I forget his first name, showed in mice and rats that starvation or caloric restriction can prolong lifespan by like up to 50%, which is huge for mice. I mean, as I said, it's the best intervention we have. So yeah, a lot of people then just thought that this should translate to humans, right? And they just started starving themselves, including myself. But then if you actually look at the studies, there actually were 2 good studies who tried to verify that this translates into primates first. Like, forget humans, let's just make sure that,
there's some in macaques, I think, isn't there? There's some
rhesus macaques, yeah, 2 studies, one in the University of Wisconsin and the other one, Washington? I forget. I've been on this topic 5 years ago, 6 years ago, kind of debunked it for myself and just kind of closed that book and forgot about it. So I'm kind of blanking on all of the details, but basically, like, if you want, I actually have a couple of Russian language Medium posts on it. But basically, yeah, they completely kind of blew that idea out of the water that in those macaques that they starved, there's really very little benefit observed, and actually in some groups actually they lived like less. Some of the, I think, male macaques lived less, the ones who were on that diet, for the like 2/3 of their life. They were starved essentially. They didn't live all that much longer. So essentially, yeah, basically what we observe in mice, I think it's like a specific mechanism for mice where they have this, like, if their genes detect that, there's some kind of starvation going on, we better let those mice live a little longer. With primates, I don't think that mechanism is there. I don't think we have that mechanism. And so I think it's completely, not silly, but it's, I wouldn't want to starve myself in the hopes of even like getting like a 10% increase, like you starving for what, like 30 years to gain a couple more years of your lifespan. That's really doesn't sound, very smart.
You'd rather have a burger and enjoy your life.
Well, the flip side is, of course, you don't want to. Basically, you can definitely shorten your life with the wrong diet. If you overeat, if you get diabetes, if you get obese, obviously that greatly decreases your lifespan.
That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, but on the flip side, if you actually, like, beyond maintaining a healthy weight, starving yourself is actually not it's not gonna give you any benefit. It actually might give you danger of, on the other hand, because actually that the graph between BMI and mortality risk is actually U-shaped. So basically the lowest mortality risk is kind of in the sweet spot of BMI between, I think, 23 and 26, versus like if you starve yourself, you start going into like 18 is already very high risk of mortality compared to like the baseline.
And often the starvation goes like with certain deficiencies, right? People not consuming enough, then they don't get enough of their essential vitamins, and they are essential for a reason, right? So this is also, if you don't do that properly, if you don't make sure to pop all the necessary pills on the side by doing caloric restriction, you're just actively damaging your body. That's the one thing. And the other thing is, like you said, in a world where more people die of obesity than of malnourishment, sure, reducing your caloric intake, modestly, I would say, is probably good for you, right? But going on this crazy, some people suggesting, don't take 48 hours and then eat for a day. This is all absurd, right? So yes, don't eat constantly from the first minute of the morning to the last second after midnight. Don't do that either. It's probably healthy to give your body some break to digest it. Also, we evolved to do like that. We evolved to sleep, and our circadian mechanism, right? There's circadian mechanisms with our eating, for example, right? That's why eating fatty food at night is bad for your insulin levels and your diabetes risk. And also in the liver, for example, we have certain steroid receptors that actually, depending on what time of the day it is, we get an upregulation and then repression of them, so that we don't start damaging our own livers at the time when these would get overexpressed by the amount of food we consume, right? But we need them, but not overexpressed. So there's all these mechanisms that play into this, and just try to live a normal, healthy life, and you're not, like I said, it's gonna do you more good than trying any crazy intervention and following it to a T, because these things are unproven, in the extreme, dangerous, and usually decrease your life quality on top of that. So why would you go through that?
So it seems like there's not much evidence behind these supplements and this intermittent fasting malarkey.
Well, intermittent fasting is actually not that's not the worst you can do, because it's intermittent. It's like it's not you're not starving yourself for days, but actually some people are starving themselves for days, and that's like really dangerous. Like if you're going on fasts for longer than 3 days, or even like 2-day fasts, that could be pretty damaging to your body. And I mean, I kind of suffered firsthand of being so silly and thinking, oh, I'm a cool biohacker. I mean, I'm young, I'm healthy, I can do a 5-day fast, no problem. And then you like actually do the blood work afterwards, and you actually I looked how long it took me to recover, because I was surprised to see that some of my kind of blood parameters gotten worse after that 5-day fast. And how long it took me to recover? It took me a few months to recover completely to the baseline. That I realized that it's not all just so easy that you think my body knows what to do. It'll I'll just starve it for a little and it'll just magically just do the best thing it could. It doesn't really work that way. So you have to be very careful. And even if you do want to go on those fasts, you should really do them under control of some kind of professional. I mean, there are clinics to do that. At least they know the signs to watch out for, the signs of malnourishment and just the dangers. So if you really want to do it, if you want to experiment on yourself, don't do it alone. Don't just, do it and think that you can just kind of do better than the medical professionals who have been studying this subject for
so guys
years.
Yuri has done it, so you don't have to, basically, is the message for this. I wanted to ask about one more thing, because Philip raised this to me and I was like, that's not a real thing, and then I went and looked and it is a real thing. The idea of parabiosis. Philip,
it's a real thing.
Yeah. Philip, do you want to explain what this is? Some people are looking into this as well.
Yeah, so the idea is basically they have a theory that, often metabolism defines, how well our cells, clean up after themselves and, rejuvenate to a certain extent. So it's kind of rejuvenation through metabolism. And the idea is that, elderly people, very old people, they already have so many dysfunctions in their metabolism that basically the blood is already pretty shitty, right? And so the idea is to just get blood transfusions from young people, from blood boys, teenagers, people in their very early 20s, and that actually will rejuvenate your metabolism as well by getting this young blood with all the, the nutrients and fresh proteins and whatever else is in their blood that would rejuvenate.
It's not quite that.
So it sounds very vampiric.
No. I mean, the thing is, it's got good underlying science behind it, because basically it's looking for pro-aging factors in the blood and anti-aging factors in the blood. And we know there's systemic signaling in our body in terms of aging and aging synchronization. And so they did a very simple study. They conjoined the blood supply of a young and an old animal, mice and rats, and they did observe rejuvenation in the older animal. Yes. And conversely, they did observe that the younger animal got a little worse. And so then the next step is, why don't we just take the younger blood, inject it into the older animal, and see if that produces some sort of rejuvenation. And some studies did produce a rejuvenating effect. And so this is a completely legit
But I think what they were saying, or what some of the studies seemed to suggest, was that it was more that the junk in the old mice's blood was being diluted.
No, it's not the junk. There is some kind of pro-aging factor. As I said, like if we're talking about synchronization, there's got to be systemic synchronization, and it's it might not necessarily all go through the blood supply. There could be other transports, maybe the lymphatic system, maybe somewhere else, somehow else. It could be like those signals transported throughout the body. But blood is generally thought to be like the main highway, information superhighway, to quote Al Gore, which takes those systemic synchronization signaling throughout the body. And so there, as I said, there's kind of two schools of thought. It could be like the younger stuff, the from the younger animals, young synchronization molecules in the blood that are given to older people or older animals kind of turn on the cascade of allele or roll back the cascade of gene expression to a younger state. Or conversely, it could be like the old synchronization factors, if you dilute them out by the blood and again maybe replace them by the younger factors as well, they have an effect. And I mean, there's different competing schools of thought
But
on that.
as far as I've seen, the gene expression actually doesn't change in the elderly, even after parabiosis.
You mean from parabiosis?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I didn't really like look into this for
the point
for
is,
a number of years already, because the effect is just so small. Like, to me, it's not even interesting to
exactly, and also the effect is transient, so this is also important.
Of course,
to say,
yeah.
right?
Like I think after you disjoin those conjoined mice, after 3 weeks, it goes back to baseline.
And
but
in
yeah,
humans,
basically this is the
just another an anecdote. In humans, we actually observed that. So if you talk to clinicians, they know, for example, when they have elderly patients and they get a blood transfusion, that they feel better for like up to a month. And this also has to do, for example, they feel more energetic. And this has to do because they have, for example, more EPO, this protein that increases your oxygen up.
That's the Lance Armstrong one, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's basically blood doping to a certain extent, right?
That's right.
So yes, there are some tangible effects, but they are transient, and it's not a life extension intervention. It's
I mean, if you do them frequently enough on a rolling basis, it could be viewed as a like life extension intervention. But of course, it's not a magic, one-time injection, and it has to be like pretty much anything, as we mentioned, that like the gene program is just so strong that like it's not like you take a pill once and you're magically rejuvenated. You have to constantly work against the genes, constantly work against. Like,
so you're on board with people that are very wealthy to just get their blood poisoned,
Well, there's apparently there is a startup, or there was a startup called Ambrosia that does this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Jesse comes in, and then he got an FDA letter to cease and desist, and then I think he moved from Florida to somewhere else, and they reopened, and they still do it. Yeah, it was like, I think 8,000 to 12,000 for one session of blood transfusion. I don't see any issue with it. Like people, they recall it, like the ethical implications. Rich people are getting healthier. How dare they? I mean, if they want to spend their money, why should you care about how they spend their money?
That's such an American way of seeing.
I'm not getting involved in the politics. If you want to buy some young blood, get on with it.
From getting fillers and plastic surgery or breast implants just because we think it's vain. It's not our business how people want to do what they want to do with their bodies. But there was another point I wanted to make about the blood transfusion. Was it about being transient? I don't know.
So what do they in these studies? They mention albumin and they mention CCL11. I don't know if those things.
About the startup. Sorry.
Oh, the startup. Yes.
Yeah. But Ambrosia was not the only one. There's actually a company, like a legit company in California called Alkahest. Actually, kind of it's Tony Weiss-Correa. I think it's UCSF. But basically, it came out of the school of parabiosis. It was Tony Weiss-Correa and the Irina Conboy and Michael Conboy. The Conboys were like the scientists, initial scientists, kind of who rejuvenated the idea of parabiosis, because blood parabiosis was actually like investigated in the Soviet Union back in 50s and 60s and 70s. And Irina Conboy is, of course, she has some background from Russia. But there's Alkahest company, legit. They're doing actually this kind of approach for dementia, for Alzheimer's, and I think for maybe in terms of dementia. And they got, I think they're running a clinical trial. I think they actually ran a couple of clinical trials. So this is not some kind of voodoo science like the drug who won't be named type stuff. This is like legit, completely within FDA guidelines, clinical research. So
very very.
Sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying
no. I was just saying, trying to jog your memory with some of the things that they said were important in here. They were talking about albumin and CCL11, but I'm not sure what those exactly are. The reasons.
Elevian. No, I don't think it's CCL11. It's GDF11. Yeah,
Right.
Elevian is a startup, another startup that kind of came out of this research. Was it Emmy Wagers? I guess it's a Harvard startup. Basically, that got a lot of funding to investigate like one particular protein, I guess, because basically people were trying to figure out what is responsible for this rejuvenating effect that we see. And I think Emmy Wagers group in Harvard kind of thought that they narrowed it down to this GDF11 protein, and so they started a company called Elevian to investigate it further, and then I think potentially move it into the clinic as an intervention.
Okay, so I mean, very odd but very interesting stuff that certain people might be interested in. I want to ask a final question. If this takes off and we find the payload and we manage to get people to live to 200, have we thought about the societal impacts of increasing human longevity and vitality for that length of time?
Overpopulation?
I mean, that's one potential. I haven't given it a great deal of thought, but overpopulation, greater energy resource demand seems like a sensible concern. I mean,
people die, right?
Philip's also raised the idea of unequal access to the treatment.
You're taking up precious air and water from us. We're not going to give you rejuvenation. In fact, we're going to withhold cancer treatment. Just die off. We're not going to give you vaccines. We're going to put you on prophylactic drugs. Just so we can clear off enough space for us. No, yeah, it's all like all of the societal impacts bullshit. It's really people trying to give excuses for why we should keep dying. And there's really no downside to people living longer. There's not going to be overpopulation. We're not going to run out of resources. All of that stuff is complete and utter bullshit.
I guess more the yes, that's a succinct answer to that angle of it. I guess more of the angle that I was coming from is, where is this going to start being adopted by humans? What is the roadmap for people getting this? Is it going to be, like Philip says, a few rich people who are just about to die say, fuck it, I'll try it, and then we see an effect, and then people start to take it up? How do you think this becomes anything like a commonplace thing, rejuvenation injections or gene therapies or even compounds and things like this?
Sure, no, it's not going to be a rich people's game just because this is such a universal desire of people. As soon as something is proven to work, something shown to be effective, it's going to be copied legally, illegally. I mean, because, once you know what works, creating a copy of it costs pennies on the dollar, right? It's like things cost a lot. Gene therapies cost a lot, not because they're expensive to produce, but because they're patented and under people or companies who invested billions of dollars to develop them need to recoup their investment, and that's why society allows them to do so. But usually it's very narrow cancer therapies where there's a dozen patients. But if we're talking about rejuvenating therapy with billions of people who want them, it's going to be once somebody figures out what works, that's going to be copied like no tomorrow, and it's going to be cheap. Everybody will have access to it. Again, whether legally or illegally, that's a different question. And how, it's going to be gradual as everything else. Once people become comfortable with, they see other people using it, it's going to be first a few bunch of early adopters who are not afraid to try. I don't know if it's a gene therapy or if it's a drug or with anything else, things that a lot of people try even without good evidence for their efficacy because they believe they're gurus or mouse studies or whatever, and they try it and other people see, oh my God, you actually look younger and you're still alive, you don't have anything new growing out of your head, maybe I'll try it as well. And more people try it out and they kind of confirm this effect, and this is how things take off. And this is, precisely, I think, how new therapies will be adopted by society at large. Like rejuvenating therapies. If they work, people see them working, and the more and more people will be comfortable with them, and they'll percolate from early adopters onto everybody else.
There was a question in the chat that was, when are you guys going to cure my male pattern baldness? Which I guess is more a symptom than a cause.
question for me. Well, actually, no. I mean, there's study. I think they're pretty good at figuring out the baldness stuff now, and there's some therapies that they're working on that basically, I guess, kind of turn back on the melanin production, and it's an active area of research that's going on. So
I also don't see a real barrier to that. It's just,
Sorry?
I don't see a real barrier to that either. I think this is a problem that will be solved soon. I don't think it's
of course, and
impossible.
of course, there's cosmetic ways to deal with it as well, of just grafting from the back of the head onto the front, and not even to mention like completely synthetic things that you can do. Or I don't know if that was just a joke, but
I think it was a half tongue-in-cheek comment.
Okay, there's therapies against that as well.
So Yuri, as we wrap up, very, very, very final question: how confident are you that we will be able to hugely increase human longevity, and how far do you think we're going to be able to take it?
There's no doubt in my mind that eventually humanity will make aging and death obsolete. I think we're not that far off from major advancements in the space. I think if we're lucky, within 20 years, there'll be something in the clinic that greatly extends, like by decades, human lifespan. In terms of research, I'm hoping that our research efforts within maybe 8 to 10 years yield something already in the clinic that we can expect to measurably prolong lifespan. But within 50 years, I'm very confident that we'll have.
So you think our generation is already? Do we already have death escape velocity? Our generation?
I think so. Yeah, we're on the brink. Again,
why couldn't my fucking parents have waited like 10, 15 years and then I'd definitely be in?
I think definitely our children are, but we might be old and decrepit if by the time we get this wonderful age freeze, we'll be frozen like the Mr. Nobody? Is that the English title?
Right? Why do you look so fucking old? Like nobody looks like that anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
But I think
that was a good movie.
For innovation, it's usually like that, people overestimate how quickly things move in the short term, but underestimate then how far things have moved in the long term. And I think for aging, it's going to be the same. You have some people that see some early developments and project that it's going to be insane. 20 years from now, we're going to live. That's not realistic. But then in the long term, like 50 years from now, probably we will have the next step being done. So, yeah.
Right. And it's that actually is, I think, very kind of binary. It's like a leap. Once you actually have the therapy, like the effect is going to be very big and noticeable.
I mean, we've seen that before, right? We've seen that this introduction of hygiene with other interventions.
Exactly. Antibiotics.
Right? It like life increased stepwise, right? Rather quickly at some point, right? And it's gonna be with anti-aging as well. The moment we have the first therapy, there will be a bump, and then it will be 10 plus 10 on everybody, right?
Guys, that was really, really fascinating. I've learned an awful lot. Yuri, I hope you find that payload as soon as possible, preferably before I hit 60 in 20 or so years. So, get moving along.
Trust me, that wait list is full.
Is Joe Rogan on it?
Not after he mentioned this drug that won't be named. No, I'm kidding. Everybody should have access to therapies which prolong lifespan. I think it's a humanitarian issue. Definitely, as soon as our company is successful, and ultimately, if we put a therapy on the market, I'll be the first one to make it as accessible as possible. I think everybody in the world should have access to it for free. Ultimately, that's a humanitarian issue, and this is a position I've held even before I actually started on this pathway of developing this therapy. I think it's humanitarian. It's a basic human right to life, liberty, and health, and that doesn't come with the expiration date. So you should always be willing. I mean, you should have the right to live as healthy and as long as possible as you want. So
I think that's a brilliant place to wrap it up. Yuri, where can people go to keep up with what you're saying, the research you're doing, the advancements from Ethereum? Where would you like to funnel them to?
I mean, we're not really public about it, and Ethereum is actually we're already. I'm on to the next company with my partner. Will be actually announcing coming out of stealth mode in September. So probably Twitter is really the place to kind of keep abreast of what I'm doing. So
okay, I'll make sure those links are down in the description. Philip, yourself, where should people go to find out what
Please
you've
don't
got to
go
say?
on social media.
Huh?
Not because of me. Don't go on social media. Do something productive with your life.
Okay, they can go to your YouTube channel, Protagonist Science, which is excellent and covers all things cutting edge science and particularly how humans navigate the modern world. It's very, very cool, very, very interesting. You won't regret heading over there. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's a little bit early for you as well, Yuri, so I really appreciate you taking the time.
it's 9 a.m. So not really.
Well, I mean,
I was joking. I'm usually at 7. I'm up.
Fair enough.
Don't worry about it.
All right.
It was fun. Thanks for hosting it, and yeah.
It's always a pleasure, buddy.
And talk about that drug again.
I'm sure we'll be back on Twitter talking about
utterly useless.
No, I'm not getting involved with this in any way at all. Right.
I just hope Joe Rogan kind of eats his words and many other people. And anyway, yeah, let's not get into that.
Awesome. Okay, have a great day, guys, and
all right.
let's chat again soon.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye now.